Okay, mainstreaming nature-based solutions to deliver greater value. Can you give us an overview of this project and how Jacobs became involved? Obviously, it's part of the Ofwat Innovation Fund, but yeah, just background to the project and your, your involvement.
Yeah. Well, I guess first thing to say, Phil, is it is very much a partnership and collaborative project. So whilst I'm sat here with a Jacobs lanyard on, my role in the program is program manager for the entire program on behalf of the partnership as a whole, and in particular on behalf of United Utilities, who are the lead partner under the Ofwat Innovation Fund program. So the program originated around about 3 years ago, actually before my time, with some conversations between colleagues at United Utilities, Northumbrian Water, Jacobs, Mott McDonald's, and various other stakeholders around I guess around water industry level of ambition for nature-based solutions and a general desire to see more nature-based solutions delivered by the water industry, but also by sectors beyond the water industry as well. And that led to conversations at the Northumbrian Water Innovation Festival back in 2022. And then subsequently a bid into the Innovation Fund that was made in the tail end of 2022, autumn 2022, which after a little bit of discussion with Ofwat around accelerating some aspects of the programme, which we can maybe talk about in a minute, that was announced as successful in spring 2023. United Utilities signed the winners agreement in July of 23. We then sort of corralled all 23 partners that we have into signing the collaboration agreement for the programme, and really it kicked off in earnest in sort of March of 2024. And the discussions around the programme initially were really kind of this, as I say, this aspiration to deliver more nature-based solutions across the industry, but recognising that there were quite a few barriers in the way of that aspiration to deliver more. And so the way that that's kind of worked out is those barriers have been chunked up into different kind of subject areas, shall we say, which have become the sort of 5 or 6 key work stream areas for the mainstreaming nature-based solutions programme. So those are looking at things like collaboration and then integrated and aligned planning. There's a whole work stream on policy and regulation. We have a work stream on funding and finance. We have one looking at common value framework, and that is very much looking at the sort of multi-capital benefits of nature-based solutions and how we can better assess all of those. We have a work stream looking at standardization. And then we're just moving now at the end of phase 1 of the programme into a phase 2 sort of process of testing with regional stakeholders. So over the last 18 months through phase 1 of the programme, each of those work streams initially undertook a bit of a literature review, an evidence gathering phase, I guess really to check and validate the assumptions around barriers that had been made in the original bid and make sure that we were happy that we understood the barriers to upscaling nature-based solutions. We published a series of initial notes on those in autumn of last year. And since then, we've been taking those work streams further to now kind of flip that round and say, well, yes, those were the barriers that we identified. What are the enablers that can be put in place to overcome those barriers to really upscale nature-based solutions going forward? And I guess that's the point where we are in the programme at this moment in time. In the next month or so, we'll be publishing a further series of briefing notes outlining all of our recommendations from the programme to date. So I guess that's kind of, in a nutshell, the overall programme. As I say, we've got 23 partners in total across around about 10 water companies, a number of consultants involved, including Jacobs, Mott's, Arups, RSK Group. Importantly, the Rivers Trust nationally is involved, and also a number of local rivers trusts and some other ENGOs like WWT and the Nature Conservancy. We've got a really wide-ranging group of stakeholders contributing to the partnership of the programme, but we've also got a much bigger reach way beyond that into sort of other organisations who have an interest in this area, including, of course, key regulators such as Ofwat, EA and RW.
Yeah, so in terms of the engagement, obviously you've outlined you've got the partners in the project, but I think you've also engaged with the regulators, wider stakeholders, because as you say, the water industry impacts lots of different areas, whether it's agriculture, even house building, etc. Yep. There's a lot of things going on, and I think you've got as far as, I don't know if you've started regional tests or you're planning them. So yeah, just tell us, if you can, or give us some idea of the engagement you've had with the wider ecosystem, if we call it that, in terms of activity.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of engagements over the last 18 months. We have for each of the work streams that I've outlined, we've had task and finish groups that have not only pulled on expertise from within the partnership, but also from broader stakeholder groups, including, regulators, DEFRA, other stakeholder groups, the likes of kind of NFU, CLA, CCW, all of those other external groups that you would expect to be engaged in a program like this. We've been to a number of conferences. So I guess one example to pick out would be the Flood and Coast Conference in early June of this year, where we ran a workshop specifically targeting local authority engagement, and we had around 40 local authorities engaging with us through that. Our funding and finance work stream, which is being led by North Star Transition, has a working group that is pulling on institutional kind of advice from sort of the investment sector. We have a LinkedIn group, and I can provide you with a link to that if you like, Phil, maybe to include with the notes for the interview, which has got around 400 members now, which we're using to kind of circulate updates from the programme, the notes as we produce them. The Common Value Framework has done a lot of engagement, again, not only with partners in the programme, but also across water companies not included within the programme, because that's something that we want to see all water companies pick up and use. And also other external kind of providers, such as the decision support tool systems that water companies use to create their capital programs that the Common Value Framework will have to be built into. So, I mean, that's just a flavour, I guess, Phil, of the different kind of external reach that we've had as a programme, and that will continue over the next couple of years.
Okay, and in terms of the sort of objectives or the benefits of the project planned, I guess implementation and upscaling the delivery of nature-based solutions is one of your priorities, alongside, I think, creating an investable pipeline of nature-based projects. So what are the sort of practical steps, or how do you hope to bring those two objectives about, if you like? What needs to be done?
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, as a program, we aren't going out and building nature-based solutions. I guess what we're doing here is seeking to create, I suppose, if you like, create an environment that enables and facilitates the mainstreaming of nature-based solutions into the future. So one key area of that, obviously, is water company investment through the price review process. So whilst I've outlined kind of the work streams and the activity that we've carried out to date as planned, I guess, through the programme, what we've also tried to do is be agile in responding to what's going on in the external environment. So an example there would be with the PR24 draft determination that was published in July of last year. We used some of the resources that we have available within the programme to carry out a review of the nature-based solutions as proposed within that programme, and look for opportunities to upscale nature-based solutions in between draft determination and final determination. So were there things that we were observing in draft determination that actually maybe some tweaks could be made to upscale nature-based solutions into final determination? We held a number of roundtables with the likes of Blueprint for Water, with the Water UK Environment Committee and water companies, with regulators, to get a kind of rounded view of NBS within the draft determination, and we sort of submitted a set of recommendations back through some of our regulatory interaction that we have on the programme in autumn of last year. And what was really nice to see is that we actually saw the scale of nature-based solutions go up from 2.2 billion at draft determination to 3.3 billion at final. Now, I don't think as a programme we can claim sort of full credit for that change, but I'm hoping that the conversations that we have and the influencing that we're putting in place at least played a part in seeing that upskill, that uptake, or that uptick. So I guess, then thinking forward as we go into the next price review process, we're thinking very much around what can we be doing with the recommendations emerging from the programme to help influence what happens at PR29, to hopefully see another uptick, perhaps a greater uptick in investment in nature-based solutions as we hit PR29. So that includes things like interacting with the EA and Ofwat WINEP review process that's ongoing. So again, to look at the barriers to nature-based solutions and what can be done to sort of overcome those. We've used resource in the programme to submit responses to some of the various consultations that have been going on, because I guess that's the other thing that's happening right now, is obviously there's a lot that is changing in the external environment in the water sector, things like the Independent Water Commission, the Cunliffe Review. So we've provided consultation responses into those, and I think it was really good to see a lot of what we've been saying through the programme come out in some of the Cunliffe final recommendations. So things like longer term, more integrated strategic plans, regional scale planning, opportunities for looking at things like regulatory sandboxes and constrained discretion in regulation to allow for more of an outcome-based regulation rather than the output-based that we've had to date. So you know, there's a lot of different areas that we're sort of pushing into, I guess, through the programme to really push forward with that transformative change of investment into nature-based solutions. And I would say it goes beyond the water company activity as well, and starting to think about who are the other players within landscapes who have an interest in nature-based solutions and landscape scale transformation. And that's something very much that our funding and finance work stream has been looking at. And again, there are conversations going on in government around that sort of thing. So recent consultation from DEFRA on funding for nature finance. Again, we were able to provide some thoughts from the programme to feed into that consultation process.
Okay, yeah, and in terms of other focuses, I think you're looking to potentially shift the balance between grey and green infrastructure. And then, I mean, you've already mentioned, I don't know whether you want to add to the cross-sector collaboration, which seems to be very important, but also very difficult to manage because obviously everyone has their own, perhaps slightly different and maybe conflicting agendas, but clearly everyone does need to collaborate to get the best possible outcome. So just your thoughts on grey-green infrastructure and then sort of cross-sector collaboration.
Yeah, and I think it's probably important to say that what we're not seeking to kind of push through the programme is nature-based solutions as a silver bullet to all of the problems that we see in our water environment. And I think what we're trying to do is to sort of level the playing field. I think that traditional grey solutions are, generally speaking, very good at doing what they do, but it can often be quite a narrow kind of benefit that they provide. So you have a wastewater treatment works that is specifically looking at reducing nutrients in the receiving watercourse as an example. Whereas what we can see with nature-based solutions, obviously, is that they can bring multiple benefits that go beyond perhaps the core benefit, the water quality benefit in that example that maybe is the primary driver, but actually nature-based solutions can provide all sorts of other benefits around biodiversity, around potentially reduced energy and chemicals usage and carbon impacts in that sense, around maybe greater environmental resilience and greater resilience of our river network. So one aspiration of the programme through the common value framework piece is that by better evaluating all of those multiple benefits, we're helping to level that playing field between nature-based solution investments and traditional grey investments. But I think also thinking about when you kind of zoom out, I suppose, from the individual asset scale up to more of a catchment scale, how hybrid solutions and nature-based solutions and grey solutions can kind of work in tandem to deliver the improvements that we need, and the opportunities, I suppose, for landscape scale transformation that can deliver more resilience within our general resilience within our water environments, whilst recognising that we might still need grey solutions to provide some specific kind of water quality improvements. So I guess when you get to that landscape scale, that really is where that cross-sectoral collaboration really starts to come in. So thinking about how the work that we're doing can interact with other sectors, interact with things like payment for ecosystem services at an individual farm scale, or aggregating those across a number of farm units up to catchment scale interventions, and then potentially institutional investment further down the line. And again, I think something like the common valuation framework perhaps helps us with those areas where, like you say, sometimes there are conflicting priorities, that actually if we can start to use standardized approaches, taxonomy, language, valuation of benefits, then different sectors can each see how their individual contributions to a landscape scale programme can provide benefits to their particular drivers. And hopefully that will allow kind of more, shall we say, sort of stacking, if you like, of investment to deliver that landscape scale transformation.
I mean, when you engage with folks outside the industry, do you generally find them receptive to what you're trying to achieve, or is there an element of resistance because they've always done it that way, or they've just perceived that what you're asking them to do will cost them money and not no obvious benefit for them themselves, or what, are there a range of responses you get?
I think actually, generally speaking, we're in a really supportive place at the moment in terms of, I guess, almost across across society as a whole. That kind of understanding that we are living in a country that is depleted from a biodiversity perspective. There is a lot of, and has been obviously over the last few years, a lot of focus on the water sector in terms of, in particular, kind of water quality impacts in our rivers and what needs to be done to change that. But I think also there's a recognition in many sectors or in many organisations that the problems in our water environment go beyond water company activity, and there are other key players within that environment. Agriculture and transport, I guess, will be the ones to pick out in particular. That also, we need to be playing their part in improving our water environment. And then also, I guess, in particular this year, for example, I think it's been so dry, and we've seen the impact of that really dry weather that, again, that has had on the resilience of our rivers. So I think that, together also with what's going on externally, things like the Cunliffe Review, it's a really opportune moment to kind of push forward with an agenda around nature-based solutions that can actually help to address all of those multiple problems. So I feel like we're in a place where actually a lot of the conversations we're having externally are really supportive. It's almost kind of the opposite to being a challenging environment. I suppose the challenging environment is actually the expectation that a lot of people have around what the program is going to deliver and where we're going to get to, and that's a great challenge to have.
Yeah, and in time, I mean, challenges, slightly different sort of challenges, but I think there are things you've identified like regional differences, need for model refinement, and I think long-term funding you also highlighted. So, I mean, are those significant challenges, or are you sort of comfortable that they can be addressed over a period of time?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the challenges, I guess that kind of comes back to some of the barriers and issues that we identified through our various different work streams. So thinking about how we can support better integrated and aligned planning at that regional scale. And again, coming back to Cunliffe, obviously that sort of recommendation that there is a regional level of planning put in place to look across multi-sectors for water is one that we would really support. And I think it's a really important one going forward, is understanding that whilst we will continue to have national strategic direction on a lot of these things, it's also important that we have a regional and local voice about what is important to our communities and to different parts of the country, and recognise that the way that things get delivered in different parts of the country may not always be the same. So I guess there's a balance to be struck there, isn't there, between standardising approaches whilst also allowing for that regional and local nuance. I think the funding one is an important one. I think particularly for the ENGO sector, sort of having some more certainty around long-term funding to help them implement and or develop catchment partnerships and then implement nature-based solutions at a catchment scale is a really important development as well. And then I guess some of the other challenges that we've been sort of identifying, thinking maybe particularly within the policy and regulatory environment, we're in ongoing discussions with regulators, again, in a very supportive way, as to, what are the changes that potentially could be made within that environment going forward. And again, some of the recommendations coming out of the Corrie Review and the Cunliffe Review on regulatory sandboxes have been really, really helpful in moving those discussions forward. Let's try and test some different approaches and see whether they work. And if they do, let's see whether they can be rolled out more widely to allow for greater uptake.
Okay, and in terms of overall, I mean, I think we slightly touched on it, but in terms of the overall attitudes to nature-based solutions at the current time and how you'd like to see them improve, I mean, I think you mentioned, financially, although you said you weren't claiming total credit, it was from sort of 2 to 3 billion invest in that. I mean, do you have any sort of idea, I suppose, as to how much improvement you want to see and what that will mean in real terms, in terms of the added investment and the outcomes that whether it's stakeholders or just the general public might notice over time?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we haven't really kind of quantified that as a number, if you like, Fern, and I'm not sure. I guess there's perhaps two schools of thought on that. Is that actually having a hard and fast target as a number would be a good thing to aim at, but there is a risk sometimes, I think, with those targets that they can have maybe unintended consequences in terms of then you've got an organisation or a sector aiming for one particular thing, and actually we need to be thinking about all of these things in the round. It's about having the right outcomes holistically rather than just focusing down on one target. So I guess what would be great to see, I think, is more of an uptick in nature-based solutions as we head into PR29. Difficult to put a number on that, I think, but if those also are being promoted in a way that they are working in tandem with more effective grey solutions to deliver better catchment scale outcomes, then I think that's the solution that we're all looking for here. As I say, it's not about pushing nature-based solutions as a silver bullet to all of our problems. It's about leveling the playing field and ensuring that we're delivering kind of the transformative catchment scale outcomes that we need.
Okay, and in terms of the overall potential, I mean, I think you mentioned earlier, obviously we've had the review, and it's no secret we've got flooding, extreme flooding events, drought events, as we're kind of seeing at the moment, and the overall water resource management. I won't say it's been let to slide, but clearly there's a need to address some of these issues. I can't remember the exact figure, but by 2050, is it we're going to need a third more water than we have now to keep everybody in the way they're accustomed, if you like, to using water. What contribution can nature-based solutions make to some of these significant challenges, which seem to me becoming more and more urgent?
Yeah, so I think probably there we're heading into sort of the contribution that nature-based solutions can make to catchment sort of resilience as a whole. So, if we can be supporting our catchments to be more resilient both to floods and to droughts, and that might then help us to offset some of that water resources risk that you've been talking about there. So I'm thinking here about opportunities potentially for renaturalizing sections of rivers so that we're slowing the flow down, maybe increased shading that helps to reduce the amount of water that gets lost during periods of hot weather, and therefore more water remains in the river, both for water abstraction for supply and agriculture, but also really importantly for the environment. So I think it's probably about looking at that long term, is about maybe not so much phrasing it in nature-based solutions, actually, when we get to the long term, and thinking about it more as kind of environmental and catchment resilience, and supporting our environmental resilience in the long term that will actually help us to protect the water environment that we have.
Okay, and I just begin to understand the time frame of the project. Obviously, you explained it's been going for a little while. Is there a sort of cut-off date I guess where at least the funding runs out, but will you potentially carry on, or do you then say, okay, over to the industry and the wider stakeholders, or is it potentially a sort of moving target in terms of when you say you've achieved
from the perspective of the Ofwat Innovation Fund program that we're currently running, the funding runs through till the autumn of 2028 for the program as a whole. So I think I outlined earlier, we're currently coming towards the end of phase one of the program, which has been very much about working through the individual work streams that we've got. And now at the sort of stage where we are making recommendations for changes and enablers that could be put in place to uptick nature-based solutions. So we're then heading into our phase two, which will involve our sort of regional stakeholders beginning to sort of test those recommendations that we're making, and I guess validating whether those would actually begin to make transformative change on the ground, or are there changes to the recommendations that we need to consider. And that, to a large degree, is what then constitutes phases 3 and 4 of the programme through to 2028, is an iterative process of gradually refining the recommendations that we've made through to the end of the programme. But I mentioned earlier that through the bid stage, Ofwat had asked for some components of the programme to be accelerated. And really, that's a recognition that programme delivery by autumn 2028 is too late to influence PR29. PR29 planning activities are happening now. And so actually the next 12 months or so is quite a critical period for the programme in terms of when we're thinking about water company and water sector investments specifically, what can we be doing over the next 12 months to influence PR29? One key part of that was the common value framework that I've talked about, which is out for consultation now. And we're aiming to sort of finalise a water company version of that common value framework by the end of this calendar year, such that then it gives regulators and water companies time to adopt that framework as they start to build those kind of processes into their PR29 business planning. And all the while, whilst the programme does continue to autumn 2028, there's also a real strong emphasis on collaboration, engagement and dissemination right the way through the programme. So it's not about us kind of sitting in an ivory tower through till October 2028 and then publishing something, ta-da, here you go. We're very much looking to kind of push stuff out through the programme as we go and seek feedback from as many stakeholders as we can, so that we're getting that endorsement, I suppose, of the programme's activities and recommendations built into the work as we do it. So yes, programme runs through to October 2028, but a lot of other things will happen between now and then in terms of programme influencing. Going beyond October 2028, I guess we'll have to see where we get to there. I think hopefully we'll be in a place where both from a regulatory perspective and potentially from a sort of beyond the water sector perspective as well, things have moved forward with consultations that have gone on in the past 6 months even, and we're starting to see some of these things really become mainstreamed. So whether or not there's a need for something like the programme to continue beyond October 2028, I guess we'll see when we get there. But in many ways, it would be nice if we didn't have to, because then we could kind of say, well, actually, that's brilliant. We've achieved what we hoped to achieve, and now it's becoming BAU across all sectors.
Maybe just finally, and more generally, if you're happy to answer, I mean, I started in the industry just before 1995 drought, and there was a lot of soul searching went on then, and various initiatives talked about, etc. And you could argue, if you take a very cynical view, 30 years later, not a lot has been achieved, if you like, and almost some things gone into reverse with funding issues for regulation, etc. But just your thoughts, with this Cunliffe report and activities such as the ones that you're involved in, do you sense there's a new mood and an optimism that things can be changed in time for addressing some of the critical issues around flooding and water resources, or do you just worry that we'll drift on for another few years and nothing much will have changed?
Well, I mean, I guess it's an opportunity, isn't it? We've seen Cunliffe, and I think there's been, my observation, I suppose anyway, would be there's quite a lot of positive reaction to the recommendations, largely speaking, of the final kind of Cunliffe report. What we don't yet know, of course, is kind of what is government going to do with that. I think they've said, positively, kind of immediately after the report was published, that they were going to implement some of the recommendations, but there's obviously a lot of recommendations in there, and I guess there's quite a lot of work to be done within government and DEFRA over the next couple of years to look at how those recommendations might be implemented. Whether they will all be implemented, I don't know. But as I say, if I reflect on it from a mainstreaming NBS programme perspective, I think we were generally really quite positive about what we saw coming out of Cunliffe in terms of some of the opportunities that there are there for, as I say, that kind of integrated and longer term strategic planning process. I think having some longer term planning processes in place, as long as those are then followed through the 5-yearly kind of price review cycle, will very much help address some of the long term issues that we see. Having that regional planning scale, I think, again, will be really important, and that's going to be also about integrating across all sectors, not just the water companies, and thinking about how all of those sectors play their part in sort of contributing to the improvement that we see going into the future. And I'm just trying to think about some of the other recommendations that came out through Cunliffe. I guess one that's maybe particularly relevant to nature-based solutions is the sort of thinking around sort of regulatory sandboxes and constrained discretion, and maybe moving to more of an outcomes-based regulatory position rather than pure outputs. And I think that's where thinking about nature-based solutions and the contribution that they can provide to holistic catchment resilience is a really good opportunity for us. So yeah, I think broadly in a positive place, but obviously we'll just have to see what government decides to do with the CULIF recommendations and how long that takes. I think those are probably two key questions at this point in time.
Okay, I mean, it's been fantastic to chat to you, and thank you so much indeed for giving me your time and sharing so many brilliant insights.
No problem. Thank you, Phil.
This particular project in the industry more widely, so really appreciate your time. Thank you, Granville.
Cheers, Phil. Thank you for that.